From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's ahead. K-State's Dan O'Brien will offer his latest price probability projections for soybeans in the wake of the trade tariff concerns and the prospect of a productive soybean harvest this fall. And he'll talk about the unexpected rally in wheat and corn futures prices. Then K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti will tell what was learned from a new K-State analysis of corn plant populations and the ensuing impact on yields. A prominent crop seed company invited him and his team to review 30 years of in-field data studying the relationship between corn plant density and crop productivity. Further ahead on Kansas agricultural weather, K-State's Mary Knapp. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and glad to have you aboard once again for Agriculture Today. On the grain markets, well, we're seeing some surprising improvement in some of the trades, and we will talk about that. We'll also hear about our guests' latest price probability projections for soybeans. Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, is on the line with us once again. Dan, let's begin with this. Corn and wheat futures are very much on the comeback trail. Have had a good run of it the last 2-3 weeks or so.
Yes, lots of action in news, speculation, fears, trepidation, and euphoria all at one time, I think, in the grain markets. If you look at corn futures, they, over the last 2 weeks, have climbed up from about $3.35 for a low. This would be the September contract, up to as high as $3.65, closed yesterday $3.61. So that's 25-30 cents thereabouts from where we had been. Wheat futures, especially, following on the heels of news of the crop problems in Europe, that which tied into the damage that's been done to some degree anyway over in the Black Sea region to Russia and Ukraine crop prospects, as well as Australia issues. So you've got some support that's coming to the wheat market. Again, had been as low as $4.70, jumped up to about $5.50, $5.55, closed yesterday at $5.34, so 60, 70 cent gain over the last couple weeks. And for soybeans, some gain had kind of spiked lower to about 8.10 or so for the low side of trade, again within the last, about 2 weeks ago, jumped up to about 8.80 than the last year. So closed yesterday at 8.61. So again, another 50, 60 cents. So as people look at that, probably the first thing they wonder about is their old crop wheat. And we've had a lot of discussion with people about whether to hold wheat further or go ahead and sell more. I think a fair amount of wheat has been sold just on what's happened. Given how pessimistic we've been with this opportunity that's come, I think people took advantage of it, especially in areas where they anticipate fall crops coming on. There's opportunity to clean up storage, and hopefully they're in a part of Kansas that had good solid protein levels in the wheat, so they were able to get some type of a benefit from that too in terms of a price premium. And
should those who haven't moved their 2018 wheat yet do so?
There's nothing wrong with taking a good price, that's for sure. And so we have come up. There are increasing thoughts and concerns, particularly with the dry conditions in Europe, that we would see at least well-supported markets going forward. Again, if the International Grains Council's projections were right, and with their anticipation of stocks tightening up, that would bode well for the U.S. To come in and be a, quote, supplier of last resort on world export markets. Now, you hear a statement like that, and it just sounds like hyperbole and right. The possibility of getting people all riled up. But the point is that for what wheat isn't sold now, if people have met their cash flow needs, it seems that there's some possibility of continued export strength beyond what we've been seeing right now in the wheat markets. And again, it's due to these other major wheat exporters in the world having not quite the crops that they'd had before, particularly in the European Union. Australia has some dry areas. There are reports that Russia now has gotten some rain to, quote, alleviate their drought, but it may have come too late to have a lot of positive impact on some of their drought-damaged crops from earlier. Again, we've been watching Ukraine as well. So really in that Black Sea region, they've had problems.
Well, before we get into the soybean scene, we shouldn't just cast aside the fact that there are drought concerns in a large chunk of the Corn Belt yet. That includes eastern Kansas and most definitely virtually all of Missouri. Yes,
there's a really interesting resource that's been made available lately. If you go onto the web and look up nasagrace.unl.edu, you can see a map that's put out that shows surface soil moisture and root zone soil moisture presented in the form of a drought indicator. Quite a large part of the heart of the production area of the state of Missouri is affected. It really as dry as their, quote, wetness percentile index shows. That area extends right into the central part of the state of Illinois up into Iowa. We're feeling the effects of that, and it shows in northeastern Kansas as well. In fact, the areas in the Manhattan, Wamego area that have been dry show up on this map clearly. So, point being that awfully dry, and drought down in Texas, parts of Oklahoma, of course out to the west, we've heard of some dreadfully dry conditions. So, challenging. My point is that when August the 10th comes around, they'll be reporting crop conditions in the USDA crop production report that are to be representative of what the crop prospects are as of about August 1st. There's a substantial part of the Corn Belt, right in the very heart of it, that isn't doing very well. And you get some reports of that coming out of Illinois with some ears that aren't filled clear to the tip, et cetera, some indications of less than stellar conditions. So we don't want to just bang the drum for all that, but there are some concerns still about where the 2018 U.S. corn crop could go, and probably kind of a horse race, I guess, between the areas that aren't having problems and these areas that are having problems. And if anything, again, we'll watch to see if they get even wider geographically.
Well, as we all know, the soybean complex continues to grapple with the uncertainties over the trade tariff turmoil out there and what's going to happen from here and whether or not we'll be able to move the beans that are expected to be somewhat bountiful as we get into fall harvest. So how all of that is playing into your latest soybean market outlook, Dan?
Well, what we know fairly well is that we know the acreage for soybeans in the United States. We see that the crop is a little bit ahead of schedule on its development. Again, just with what we've just been talking about, we see where dry conditions are. The national ratings are still positive, better than they were last year. So right now, it seems that unless the worst fears of what could happen in August, i.e. extreme dryness, come through, it looks like you're somewhere around a 4 billion bushel U.S. soybean crop in 2018 again. So that's pretty well known, and really in terms of something that would jump futures higher, we'd have to have quite a surprise probably in that August crop report to move anything in the short run. Really, the unknown, I think, is the strength of U.S. soybean exports through fall 2018. And really the rumors and the fears and the narrative consensus that's out there is all pretty pessimistic and worried. And again, so we're watching news conferences between the U.S. administration and other world leaders, whether it be the European Union or reports of discussions between the U.S. and China or Japan. And so I think all of that in our risk-averse avoidance nature is leading to pessimism on the soybean market.
And then we'll close with this. As you are wont to do on occasion, you have factored all of this in and put together your latest price probability projections for soybeans this time around. And you've taken up 3 scenarios here that gives us an idea of what could happen amidst all of these unknowns, Dan.
Well, here I got done grousing about how the market was pessimistic. Then you asked me to put up my own forecasts, and they're all just as pessimistic as anybody else, except for one. USDA's projection is for about 13 to 14% stocks use, and they projected a price of about $9.25. Well, if conditions are right, we get larger production instead of 48.5 bushels per acre, get to 51. Well, stocks would grow some. Prices instead of $9.25, we could find ourselves overburdened. We could go 75 cents to $1 lower if we just get overwhelmed with beans and there's just no hope of movement. Lower exports, that is a fear that's out there. If we really see the bottom drop out, U.S. exports drop 150 million bushels, then you're closer to 600 or 700 million bushels of exports, and again, you're somewhere around $8 soybeans. It's just a matter of how you get there. Mm-hmm. There is the possibility of smaller production yet, and as we talked about, and what is that probability? Well, right now, to be conservative, it's probably 15-20%. But if we get more like a 46 bushel per acre yield instead of this USDA projection of 48.5 for the U.S. this year, ending stocks closer to 450 to 500 million bushels, stocks to use closer to 10, more like at 10 or 11. Then instead of this 925 number that the USDA has out there right now, you're looking at 950, 975, something like that. So really, we're just looking at that supply-demand balance sheet and just wondering if it will be the supply side or the usage side, and the usage mainly coming through exports. The positive underlier in the soybean market is, man, we're crushing a lot of soybeans, and we're exporting a lot of soybean meal. And I need to check to see whether the tariffs on soybeans are pushing buyers to look to buy soybean meal rather than the beans. That would be a strong crush signal in the U.S. But again, we'll see how that plays out in coming weeks.
Well, this is all very well spelled out in the special soybean market outlook write-up for late July 2018 that Dan has posted, along with his regular weekly grain market notes, all on the agmanager.info website. Producers, agmanager.info. Good work, Dan, as always. And many thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
He is Dan O'Brien, grain market economist for K-State Research and Extension based in Colby, Northwest Kansas, and we'll return in a moment on this Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and continuing on now, we're going to speak of work that was conducted recently by our guest and his team in analyzing over 30 years of corn plant population data. Now, there's a backstory to this, and we'll get into it, but what it has revealed is quite interesting findings about plant populations as you producers go about sowing your corn. And Ignacio Ciampitti is with us, crop production and cropping systems specialist, K-State Research and Extension. You and your colleagues were invited to take a look at all of this data, and you might tell us of the origins of it, Ignacio.
Yeah, thanks as always, Eric, for the invitation. This probably started, I would say, around 3-4 years ago, and we started having some communication with DuPont Pioneer, the agronomy section, and basically how we can provide some new insights for farmers in terms of corn and plant population was one of our first topics of discussion with DuPont Pioneer when we were thinking about utilizing this information. Large data set. I don't know if we can call this big data, but I can tell that it's a large data set. We were basically collecting close to 200,000 observations. And this is basically from 23 states in the U.S. and 3 provinces in Canada. So we have information from all the areas producing corn in the U.S. and 3 provinces in Canada since 1987 till 2015, and now we are adding 16 and 17. So we are continuing some of this effort. And all this started with the idea of our farmers they wanted to know exactly, okay, what is the optimal population for my field?
The exact number that they need to seed.
Exactly. And one of the things that we start discussing with the company is that having this large data set we shouldn't be based our recommendations on a number, because as you might imagine, these optimal plant populations are changing by the weather. If a year you have a favorable weather, your optimal plant population will be greater than in a year that is dry weather. So what we decided is to really look at this data and start doing an analysis that will reflect what is the probability for this farmer, if we use the last 20 years of information or 30 years of information, to get this type of weather. So what we would like to provide to the farmers is the probability to get into the 24,000 optimal seeding rate is maybe 50% on the years. And you have a probability of going to 28,000 only 10-15% of the time. So that gives you some information that farmers can play to be conservative, and they can just use the 50% probability analysis, or they can play to be more aggressive and trying to increase the seeding rates. That all that situation will apply in the best environments. When you have a good weather conditions, optimal seeding rate will go up. So with that objective, basically we start discussing, we're collecting information from the last 30 years. And one of the main things that we analyzed on this data specifically was, one, what was the overall yield gain? Okay, and this might be the first time that we have enough information at the country level. Many times, corn yield gain was quantified in small research plots, but never really using country-level yield data.
This is completely more comprehensive.
Completely more comprehensive and having so many different, environments, right? One of our findings, if you look at close to the last 30 years, is showing that our yield gain is close to, 53 bushels per acre in terms of increase in yield gain.
Which is a startling number, actually.
Yeah, and also, this number is coming together with the idea of the changes on population, trying to minimize the effect of weather. So the way that we decided to minimize the effect of an anomaly year was trying to use the first 5 years, the average of the first 5 years, and trying to get all that data and basically calculate an optimal population for the first. And we basically did it from 1987 to 1991. And then for that specific period, our optimal population was around 30,000 plants. When we did the same analysis for the last 5 years, we went to 2012 to 2016, our optimal population was close to 38,000.
So almost an 8,000 plant.
Exactly, but this 8,000 plant increase in population is also connected to the yield increase. Mm-hmm. Because, as I mentioned before, we went from 135 bushels per acre to almost 190. So you can see how the changes in populations are really connected by that yield gain. Of course, this data can be used in multiple ways, even using an economic analysis. One of the main outcomes that it was truly interesting from looking at this data is the modern hybrids. The hybrids that growers are using today, they seem to have more what we call flexibility. When you're looking at the optimal populations, the range that basically those hybrids are maintaining yields is wider as compared with all hybrids. Mm-hmm. When you are getting one old hybrid and pushing to higher population, that hybrid basically we say crashed. Right. Because you are overpassing your optimal, and the range for that optimal was too narrow.
For maybe older hybrids.
Exactly, maybe 1,000 plants, 1,000 seeds. Today we might have ranges on optimal that might be between 3,000 or 4,000 seeds.
So it's more forgiving, and therefore when weather is not ideal, it can still compensate.
And it's more forgiving on the upper side. For example, it's more forgiving that if you went over, right, to the optimum population, if you have a good weather environment, you might maintain, okay, you are not improving your yields, you maintain, then is when you start thinking about, we might need to start looking at economic optimal plant population. Because when the range is so flat in the upper section and the maximum yields, then you start wondering, maybe I can cut a little bit on number of seeds and still maintain my yields. And this is one of the things that to emphasize that these modern hybrids really can show some stability. And that's one of the main points. And then another point that was very intriguing for us, we always say that as we are increasing plant population, the ear size tend to be reduced. And then many times we are starting to lose number of kernels per year. So what I was very intrigued is when we start looking at the yield gain, we start seeing that the new hybrids, there seems to be some indication that they are improving that current number. So that means that you are pushing on population, but still those hybrids now, they might maintain ear size more than the hybrids that we used in the past.
And now this is about genetic improvement.
This is related to genetic improvement. This is telling us that the yield improvement that was partially due to increases in plant population in the last 30 years, it was not only coming because these plants are more adapted or more tolerant. So today you can put more plants per acre and still can yield well. But it's also because at the plant level, when you're looking at one individual plant, can yield more as compared with an old hybrid. Okay, and that is relevant because many times we believe that there was and still we believe that there's a kind of a trade-off between population and plant yield. These are basically main key findings because after this finding, we can start thinking about all the potential mechanisms, that we need to start studying in order to increase yield. And one of the main questions is how far can we still push population and still gaining yields?
There's a plateau at some point.
Yes, and I think that we will be gaining. Some of the studies that we did on this data set also shows that our yield gain in many situations was coming on the high end. That in the medium or the low yield environments, our yield gain was very small. That means that in the future, I think that our focus is really to see how we can increase also that kind of a yield in the low and medium environments. On environments that the corn is not doing well or is too susceptible, we can still, I think, that improve yields. And maybe potentially in the future, much of our yield gain will come from improving those low-yielding environments.
So in the end, as a producer who is reevaluating their plant populations, what is the message that they can push the envelope a little further as far as those populations, Ignacio?
I would say that many times, our information shows that the population is really connected to the yield target. Average 5-10 years yield target for this environment. So if you know that information, you are the best person in selecting the right optimal population. Because for a person that is working on 120 bushels yield potential, you know that your population is closest to the low side. And then anytime that you are pushing that envelope and pushing too far, then you might get penalized. And you will get penalized more in years like dry years. In that case, you are in a low side of the yield, so you can still play conservative and be stable on the decisions. When you are in an irrigated field, what you're looking is really to push that envelope and maximize yields. And if your yield goals is 250 and plus, then is when I will challenge those guys to say, okay, when you're looking at all the inputs, you need to start looking at density and make sure that you are at the optimum level. Because if you are not at the optimum level, if you are below that optimum, you are leaving yield on the table.
Ignacio, thanks for the word on what you and your team have put together in the way of this analysis, as always.
Thanks, Eric, for the invitation.
Ignacio Ciampitti, crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. He and associates here at the university were commissioned by DuPont Pioneer to analyze that company's 30 years of corn plant population data and connecting that plant density information with substantially improved yields over time. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we will return shortly.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. Today's agricultural news headlines coming your way now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, President Trump talked up biofuels. In his visit to Iowa yesterday, the president told those gathered in Iowa that the administration is, quoting here, taking care of your ethanol. That's a nod to the fact that Iowa is the biggest ethanol-producing state in the U.S. He also noted that they're very close to a 12-month waiver of the Reed Vapor Pressure, or RVP, rules that would allow for year-round sales of E15. Acting EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler mentioned the E15 situation in remarks earlier this week at an event in Washington, saying he would move forward with plans to sell E15 year-round to allow renewable identification numbers generated on exported biofuel to count toward the RFS requirements, and to requiring larger refiners to blend more ethanol into motor fuel to make up for obligations waived for small refiners. But he also stated those efforts would not be done on a piecemeal basis, but rather as one package. And as you know, the President and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker announced that the two sides have agreed to start discussions on eliminating tariffs and subsidies that impact the transatlantic trade and to resolve issues on the U.S. steel and aluminum import duties, including the retaliatory tariffs put in place by the European Union. The officials also said that both sides would hold off on further tariffs while the talks take place. That a signal that the U.S. will not impose tariffs on U.S. imports of vehicles from the EU. That framework does include the EU increasing the import of U.S. soybeans. No details on the amount yet, but the president said the EU plans to start buying a lot of soybeans, as he put it, in the coming weeks as a goodwill gesture in their ongoing trade talks. While Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross later said that there would be more commodities than just soybeans involved. The Wheat Quality Council's Hard Red Spring and Durum Wheat Tour ended yesterday with an estimated average spring wheat yield of 41 bushels per acre. That would be above 38 bushels last year, but below the 5-year average of 45.5 bushels per acre. In total, this tour visited 342 spring wheat and durum fields. Last year, the tour visited almost 500 wheat fields and found then a drought-stricken crop with an average of just over 38 bushels per acre last year. This year, scouts expected a bin-buster wheat crop based on USDA crop predictions and weekly crop condition ratings. Tour organizer Dave Green of the Wheat Quality Council said instead they found a variable wheat crop with below-average yield potential. A number of factors likely played a role in the subpar crop this tour uncovered this week, according to Jim Peterson, the Policy and Marketing Director for the North Dakota Wheat Commission. To begin with, he said many fields had not quite recovered from last year's drought condition. Although the Dakotas did see more rainfall in the normal sense this year, they were often spotty, were those rains, and extremely heavy in others, he said. He said they did get beneficial moisture in June, but not those 2-day soakers that are typical and help the crop out. The region also saw a hotter than average June, which can be tough on wheat, which is fundamentally a cool season crop, Peterson said. Finally, he added, producers facing low prices in June had to make tough decisions on fungicide applications, and many may have opted out of that. Recently, representatives of the U.S. wheat industry traveled to South America, reaching out to wheat buyers from the Latin America region. The opportunity to further develop the market in that area appears promising, according to those who took part. Marcia Boswell has more on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
The Latin American region of Mexico, Central America, and South America imports nearly 1 billion bushels of wheat annually, with 368 million bushels coming from the United States. Imports from the U.S. are expected to increase to more than 500 million bushels by 2050. Fostering relationships with this expanding market has been a long-term priority of U.S. Wheat Associates, the export market development organization for the U.S. wheat industry. U.S. Wheat Associates holds a Latin American buyers conference every other year. Attended by 97 participants representing 16 countries, this year's conference was held July 18th through the 20th in Brazil as a way to nurture relationships between U.S. wheat farmers and buyers in the region. Kansas Wheat CEO Justin Gilpin says it's significant that the conference was held in Brazil this year because Brazil is one of the world's leading wheat importers. At the forefront of this year's conference was the apprehension of a growing number of trade policy concerns. This was quickly replaced with the excitement and abundance of opportunities available from U.S. Wheat Associates and the 2018 U.S. wheat harvest. U.S. Wheat Associates President Vince Peterson illustrated the changing dynamics of global wheat trade and increased competitiveness from Russia and other non-traditional importers into the region. Mark Fowler, VP of Overseas Operations for U.S. Wheat, followed up by highlighting the need for providing increased value for our U.S. wheat customers through additional technical service. He said U.S. Wheat Associates continues with the variety of quality provided by the 6 classes of U.S. wheat available to remain the best choice for our customers in Latin America. As the market becomes more competitive and our customers strive to differentiate their products to their customers, our ability to provide the technical service and product development assistance becomes even more vital to our success. Dr. Romulo Lolato, Extension Wheat Specialist at Kansas State University, spoke on the role of agricultural extension on wheat quality, a case study for hard red winter wheat. According to Gilpin, Lolato was able to communicate to buyers about what Kansas wheat farmers are putting into their crops for both management and quality. He said buyers have a better understanding of what goes into the production and management of Kansas wheat for quality. This will help differentiate us in a competitive marketplace. Aaron Harries, Vice President of Research and Operations for Kansas Wheat, said this conference is a chance for farmers to meet these buyers face-to-face, show their appreciation for their business, and to allow them to ask questions of the people who grow the wheat they are buying. Harries said meeting with international wheat buyers in Latin America is important because we export half of the wheat that we grow every year. It's important for farmers to have those markets. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
All right, Marcia, many thanks. More than a few locations here in Kansas could benefit substantially from a good soaking rain, and that may be in the cards for this weekend. As we'll hear from K-State's Mary Knapp, she'll check in to talk Kansas agricultural weather with us next, here on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Now on Agriculture Today, Kansas agricultural weather and our weekly visit with K-State Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp, who recaps for us this week, Mary, a cooler week in Kansas and quite a stark contrast from what we had going on a couple of weeks back.
Well, yeah, we'll have to take in mind that the week that I talk about is generally the week that ends on Tuesday,
right?
Because that's what feeds the U.S. Drought Monitor. We did have some cooler than normal temperatures in the division. The Northeast and the North Central were the two divisions that came in on the cool side. That has extended in the rest of this week, ending with a very nice overnight lows last night. We saw lows as cool as 46 up in the Marysville area, which is getting a little bit on the cool side, particularly for those that are still looking at their sorghum crop and saying, hey, wait a minute, no, we don't need to have any problems with that one.
Makes folks a little nervous.
Right. But daytime temperatures have still been in the low 90s to upper 80s, which are a little bit cooler than what we would typically see at this time of the year, but not dramatically colder. Most of the lows were in the low 60s to upper 50s, which again are not particularly unusual, and a welcome relief to the heat that we had to start the month of July. So that has been very welcome. And that has also been accompanied with a drier air mass, so humidity levels have been less. Again, those nighttime low temperatures have been a big relief to particularly livestock producers where you don't have that continued stress on the livestock.
You bet. But again, the drought monitor indicating that there are pockets in Kansas in exceptional drought, and unfortunately one of those is right around this region.
Right. You get into Marion County, over into Morris County, Wabaunsee County. Just south of the Kansas River is where the hot spot or the biggest concentration of it currently is at. That expanded eastward and a little bit further south. They expanded a little bit. Again, those areas have missed out on the rain, and the cooler temperatures are not reducing that evaporative demand that much. There was also an expansion of the extreme drought. Some of that north central area that had been drought free has moved back into that abnormally dry state. There have been problems with pond water, which has just worsened. They've not improved any at all. One of the complications with that has been there's been increasing restrictions on municipal water supplies and rural water supplies, which has made it more difficult for those producers that are trying to haul water. The Kansas Water Office is the point of contact if you need emergency water withdrawals. You start with the Kansas Water Office, and then they can connect the producer with the appropriate entity to make that water available as is possible.
And again, when we're talking pond water, recharge won't happen with one or two rain events.
Generally not, unless it's one of these, as they used to call them, toad stranglers, where you get 5 inches in 5 minutes, then you might get some runoff. But in most cases, it's going to need an extended period of rainfall in order to get that runoff to occur and get that recharge to start happening. So it will take some time for that to recover. And again, depending upon the geographical features in your area, it can be longer or less. And we've seen that in the past here, and just looking at the Kansa, where we'd get a 3-inch rain, the Kings Creek would raise just while it was raining, and as soon as the rain stopped, it went back down again, simply because there was that much capacity in the water network that required filling, and again, we're looking at that.
There may be no toad stranglers in the forecast for the weekend, but generous rainfall is still in the offing, you say.
The quantitative precip forecast does call for widespread areas of 2 or more inches of rain across most of the state. Extreme northeastern Kansas is likely to be on the lower side, looking at more in the neighborhood of 3/4 of an inch. But for most of the state, 2+ inches of rain is a distinct possibility, but it's uncertain exactly as to when that might happen. We're looking at 40 to 50% chance of rain through most of the weekend.
And then into next week, still hit and miss chances for moisture and cooler temperatures to linger for at least part of the week?
We're looking at the cooler temperatures to persist at least through midweek and then move back towards normal temperatures. After this week, we may move back into a slight dry spell. When you look at the 8 to 10 day forecast, which carries us through the first week of August, it goes back to a slight chance for drier than normal across much of the state.
And then we're into the month of August, and you mentioned last week that monthly forecast is suggesting warmer than normal and equal chances of normal rainfall. Has that changed any?
No, that has not changed. We may get an update next week on that, but right now the outlook for the month of August remains the same, which, as you noted, is for equal chances on the rainfall and a slight tilt towards warmer than normal conditions. Should be noted when we talk about that being warmer than normal, it doesn't indicate to what degree it will be warmer than normal. So it could be a little bit warmer in the highs or in the lows, but not the very warm low temperatures that we saw in July. it should also be noted as we move into August, we're moving into our fall season. It's not fall yet, but the normal high is decreasing as we move into that fall season. So typically the highest normal temperatures occur in late July, early August. So we're on the downhill side of that peak heat, and that means that what would be a normal high temperature in July will be a slightly warmer than normal high temperature in August.
We're heading in the right direction on several fronts. And Mary, thank you, as always. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric, to you as well.
She's Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension, along with us each Friday to get into the Kansas agricultural weather scene. And we bid you a good weekend as well. Please rejoin us here on Monday, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson, this has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.